So as I mentioned, my name's Nicola Lyons, Community Engagement Officer. There's our website, and if you do want to tag us on Twitter or whatnot, then you can use that handle there as well. So we are the Transforming the Trent Valley Landscape Partnership Scheme. We're funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund for a 5-year scheme, and we're just coming to the end of the 2nd year. This is our scheme area in purple here that you can see. The reason that it's so long and thin is because we are so focused on the river and on the floodplains. So we pick up the River Trent here near Rugeley. We follow it along through to Alrewas and then up the A38 corridor through Burton-on-Trent and then into Derbyshire up almost to Shardlow. But we also pick up some of the River Dove coming down past Uttoxeter and some of the River Tame in Tamworth as well. And all of the projects within the scheme are focused on the river, on the floodplains and on the communities around the river as well. The scheme is led by Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. They are the lead partner. They hold the grant, but there are 18 different organisations involved. Some of them are delivery partners. They deliver parts of the project. So, for example, Support Staffordshire, who I'm employed by, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, Canal and Rivers Trust, East Staffordshire Borough Council are all delivery partners. But we also have some supporting partners as well. So that's people like the Environment Agency, Tarmac and Aggregate Industries, and they support the scheme and they sit on the board that way as well. So within the scheme as a whole, there are 16 different projects which make up the scheme across broadly 3 different themes. So the Connecting Communities Through Action theme is very much about participation, about engagement with all the projects. So volunteering opportunities, practical conservation work when we're allowed to get out and do that, children and family activities, school engagement, youth engagement, all those things that engage people with the projects. We have a River Valley Connections theme, which is about access, so access into and across the landscape through circular walks, long distance footpaths, canoe trails, cycleways, things like that, but also interpretation boards and information on website and social media as well. And then the 3rd theme is the Transforming the Landscape theme, which is looking at the restoration project. So that's restoration of some of the old river channels, improvements to the floodplain meadows, the biodiversity, and also the cultural heritage. So restoration of some of the pillboxes along the stop line along the Trent and the Dove, and looking at the other built heritage of the area as well, and people's memories that they hold of it. So that is a very brief introduction to the Transforming the Trent Valley scheme. I think it gets briefer every time, but I just wanted to make you aware of these upcoming talks as well. You can book all of these through Eventbrite in the same way that you booked onto this one. And as you can see, we've got a range of topics coming up, and we've got more in progress and to be confirmed as well. So if you are enjoying these talks, and I know some of you have been to quite a few of them by now, then please do have a look and book onto any more that you're interested in. So that's really all I wanted to say. So I will hand over now to Dave Emley. So Dave is the Staffordshire County Moth Recorder, and he's going to tell us about wildlife sightings, wildlife recordings, biological records. So thank you very much, Dave.
That's great. Thanks, Nicola, and good evening, everybody. I think I know some of you know me. As Nicola said, I'm a county moth recorder, but a lot of people are probably thinking, well, what is a county recorder for a start? How do you become one? What do they do? So hopefully this talk is not one I've done before. It's a sort of personal take on recording wildlife and how things have changed from when I first started. I mean, when I first started this, about 40, 50 years ago, life was very simple. You just sent your records to the local museum, and that was it, and they're all on paper. But so much has changed now, and it's supposed to be more slick. But I'll be honest with you that recording wildlife at the moment is a bit of a mess. For instance, you know, if I was to go to, I don't know, Carnarvonshire, find a rare beetle, who do I tell? Who's the county recorder for beetles? And in Carnarvonshire, say, it's not that easy. So there are ways around that now, and methods coming to the fore, which I hope are going to improve in the future. And I'm going to cover those today. But I'm going to try, first of all, sharing my screen, and let's see if it works. Right.
It should
Share. Do. Okay. Can you see that screen now? Is that okay? Yeah, fine. Just got to make my other one full size so I can see what's going on. So recording wildlife. Why do we need to do it, and how do we go about it? Well, in the early days, when I first started, everybody, when they were out in the field, had a notebook with them and a pencil, and they recorded what they saw. And they didn't just record what they saw, they also recorded how many of what they saw. Things were very sort of organized in a way. People were very careful, but there weren't as many people interested in the outdoors there are now. But I've still got all my data. It's all there in paper, but of course, it's not accessible. If I want to find out what I saw, I don't know, at Belvide Reservoir in 1988, I've got to go through this folder here to look for it. So these days, we're looking at digital recording, and this is what I'm going to be covering later in the talk. I'll take you through one or two of the apps which are available to do that. So this country, believe it or not, probably leads the world in the acquisition of data on our flora and fauna. A lot of this data was published in atlases like the ones you can see here, the bird atlas, and etc., etc. But in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, most of the maps in those atlases have been made available online. So it's an incredible resource we've got. Not just birds, but plants, and a lot of insect atlases are available to us online. This talk first came to me, well, I used to work at Keele University, some of you will know that, and we used to run a course where students were doing phase 1 habitat surveys, and one of the things they wanted to do was to look at the feasibility of introducing mute swans to the campus. And one of the things they were doing was searching the internet, lots of data there on mute swans, where were they, how long did they live, and all that sort of stuff. And I said to them, where do you think this data is coming from? You've quoted me so many thousand pairs of mute swans. You've shown me distribution maps of where they occur. Where's that data coming from? And none of them knew. They didn't realize that all this data, which provides the maps for all these atlases, is coming from you and me. It's coming from what we would term today, I suppose, citizen scientists. So in a way, the citizen scientist, you and me, are actually the linchpin of wildlife recording. We provide the data which the experts then go on to use. But I said to them, okay, you've got this data. Here's a nice map of mute swan. How do you know that data is correct? Can you rely on it? We said there's a hit dots all here for mute swans. How do you know it's correct? Who says it's correct? And where? And in fact, does it matter whether it's correct or not? And if we look at this map of mute swan, if there was a dot here in the middle here, which wasn't a mute swan, it wouldn't make any difference, really. It wouldn't alter the story that mute swans are found all over the British Isles. But if you take this case, this is the Welsh clearwing moth. It's a group of about 15 species of moths whose larvae bore into the trunks of various species of tree and shrub. Each species of moth has a particular species of tree it's associated with. this moth here, Welsh clearwing, was thought to be extinct on Cannock Chase, its only place in Staffordshire where it occurs, and you can see its main headquarters was here in Wales, hence the name Welsh clearwing, but there's also subpopulation up here in Scotland. But supposing somebody recorded a Welsh clearwing down here, say, then we've got to make sure we actually know that that is correct, because we could start to invest money in habitat management for this particular moth based on perhaps what might have been a wrong identification. So somewhere down the line, the data which we as members of the public collect has got to be verified before it's made available, if you like, or put on the national databases. And that's something we're going to talk about later today. Most national atlases are done at a 10-kilometre scale. So the map you see here for Rhododendron ponticum is 10 km square. That means, what does that mean? Well, it could mean as little as one sighting in 100 square kilometres. It doesn't really tell you very much at a local level, but at a national level, the accuracy is good enough, and we can see quite clearly the distribution of Rhododendron ponticum across the UK. If we're looking at atlases for a county level, then we start to look at tetrads, which is 2 kilometres by 2 kilometres. And you can see here that the distribution is still quite widespread in the county, but we've still got quite a lot of empty gaps here where rhododendron has not been recorded. So when we're out recording, we need to make at least a 1 kilometre grid reference so that we can actually plot at the tetrad level. Even if we don't plot at the 1 kilometre level, at least it will allow us to plot at a tetrad level. So let's have a look. Right. So originally, most of the maps that were done were mainly doing a presence or absence of the organism concerned. Tick if there's a house sparrow in your square, or tick if there's a coltsfoot growing here or there. So it's just presence or absence. But today we've got much more modern techniques which allow us not just to make a note of presence or absence, but to make a note of how many of an organism we're seeing. And this then allows us to produce these abundance maps. So on the map on the left, we can see house sparrow is found throughout the British Isles, but it doesn't tell us very much about house sparrow. We just know it's everywhere. But if we look at this map where we've counted house sparrows in the 10 kilometre squares, we can see, I mean, it's obvious, we all know this, there are concentrations of house sparrows in the urban areas, whereas as we get in more into the uplands, isolated farms and so on, and up here there's none at all, which is what we'd expect. But it does show by going out now and counting organisms rather than just putting a tick there to say we've seen it or we haven't seen it, we can get a lot more meaningful information.
Can we go to the top layer?
So repeating atlases over a period of time can allow us to reveal changes in distribution. So what's happening now is that I think it's usually on a 10-year cycle, these national atlases are being repeated so that we can then start to see how things have changed. So here we've got a map of buzzard, which when I first started bird watching in Staffordshire, we used to go to the Welsh borderlands to see buzzards. To be honest, it would be a day out to Tregaron Bog or somewhere to see buzzards and possibly red kites. So this was the situation of breeding distribution of buzzards in 1968-72. And you can see here, concentration of buzzards in the upland areas is what you expect. But if we then repeat that survey in 2008, 2011, you can see buzzards are all over the country now. So by repeating surveys, it allows us to monitor change. And if we look at this next map here, what this map shows you is that the pink areas here are where buzzards were present in both the 1968-72 survey and the 2011 survey. But the little orange arrows are where they were present in 2008-11, but not in 68-72. So all these ticks here are birds which have appeared since 1972. So it's shown you how the buzzard is expanding over the country by repeating these surveys. And so it's shown as success, but it can also show us the opposite. And one of the objects of monitoring any organism is to keep an eye on what's going on. We need to know if things are disappearing, and turtle dove here is a case in point. 1968-72, you could still guarantee to go out into Staffordshire and hear turtle doves. 2008, 2011, that's where the turtle doves are, they've gone. And that map is even worse now. 2020, you'd probably see very little around here, and turtle doves would be concentrated down here in the southeast. And it's estimated that in a few years' time, turtle doves could well be extinct as a breeding species in this country. But it's only by people like ourselves going out and taking part in these surveys and monitoring them that we're able to see this. And if we look at this map here shows you where between the two surveys of 68 and 72 and 2008, 2011, these black triangles are where turtle doves have disappeared between those two atlas surveys. But again, as I keep repeating, it's the likes of us going out and taking part in these surveys that we can find out this information. So you might sort of say, well, haven't we got enough data? We've been looking at all this stuff for years and years. Well, this is the distribution map for one of our most common moths, the large yellow underwing. And you can see it's found throughout Staffordshire. But if we look at it at a tetrad level, you can see it's not found all over the county. There may be several reasons for that. One, of course, is that it doesn't occur. The other reason, of course, is nobody's looking. And so one of the objects of perhaps this talk is to encourage people to go out and look and record things. And there are squares where virtually it's a desert, SK03, this square here. I've got about 100 species of moths recorded for that square, whereas the squares either side of it, I've got nearly 500 species. And that's because nobody is looking for moths and perhaps other insects. It seems to be a bit of a place not many people visit. It's the square with Eutoxeter in it. So if any of you live in Eutoxeter, get a moth trap, please. But you can see the other thing that shows up is that some of these squares, whilst they look quite full at a 10-kilometre level, at a tetrad level, that square could only be filled up by one visit to one site. So that's one visit to us within 100 square kilometres. So looking at this, it tells us large yellow underwing is widespread, but looking at this, it tells us there's still quite a lot we need to know about it as to where it occurs, and hence the need for more people to go out looking. And I know this is a moth, but it could equally well be a plants or beetles or something. I know we've got a beetle man with us tonight, but and I'm sure he would agree that we need more people going out and looking. But that's one of the objects today, is just perhaps try and explain where you can go and look out for these things. So at the end of the day, we've collected this data, but how can we rely on the accuracy of the data in these atlases, which you can see hidden at the back? And this is where we come on to this business of verification. Okay, how does it work, and what is a county recorder? And so if you're new to wildlife recording, and you may not have come across this concept. So, but just to digress, basically a county recorder is somebody who takes on the job of coordinating the data on, in my case, it's moths, but there could be, we do have a county recorder for beetles, we have a county recorder for plants. This person is responsible for organizing the collection of data on the various groups which they look after. And the county recorder is usually an expert in their field, or at least somebody who's been looking at that particular group of organisms for a long time. And every group of plants and animals has got either a county recorder, one person or group, small committee, or they may have a record recording scheme looking after that particular organism or group of organisms. And the idea is that you as field recorders go out in the field and you collect some sightings. What do you do with those sightings? You've got a number of options what you can do with your sightings. You can send them to the local record centre. Now, a lot of museums have a biological record centre. We've got one which is attached to Wolsey Bridge, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, called the Staffordshire Environmental Record. They're responsible for coordinating the collection of data on our county. We've got national recording schemes like the Hoverfly Recording Scheme, who want information from you on hoverflies or whatever. What happens if you find a rare hoverfly, say, is you'd send in the records to the National Recording Scheme, and they may send that record of that rare hoverfly to the county recorder for hoverflies to check, and then he will say, yes, that's okay, I agree with it, and you would send that record back and it would go onto their database. Similarly here, the field recorder could find a rare moth or have us run a moth trap in their garden, and they can send their records straight to me as county recorder, and I can put them on my county database. What I will do then is send a copy of the moth records on our county database to the Staffordshire Local Record Centre. And Staffordshire Local Record Centre, if you send data straight to them, they will send it to me for verification. So no matter what you do with your data, whether you send it to there or to there, it will come to me and I'll say, yes, that's okay, or no, I need some information to help me to decide whether you saw what you said you saw. It's quite funny, really. You actually, when you first start being a county recorder, you end up not believing anything anybody ever tells you unless they can prove otherwise. You become very skeptical. But after a while, if you don't get to know somebody well, and they've got a good track record, you don't then tend to question what they see. But if it's a rare thing, maybe only one or two county records, then the county recorder does need to actually verify it and say, yeah, that's okay. And it's really important that that step takes place, because people doing research on moths or plants, maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the line, need to know that the data they're looking up is reliable. And the only way they can know that it's reliable is that the data has been verified and passed as being okay by the county recorder. So that's the whole essence of this, is that data that's used in the future, people have got to be able to rely on what the accuracy of that data. So one of the problems we find is that the internet is a wonderful tool, but a lot of the information on there is unverified. Anybody can put something on the internet and say it's this or that species. And I've found this before with people sending me a record of a moth and saying, oh, well, yes, it's this species. I've seen a picture of it on the internet. And of course, what they do is they look at the picture, but they don't see the text which goes with it to say this species is found in South America or something like that. And I've had this before. I've had this, people finding a fancy caterpillar and they've said, oh, it's this, without bothering to look up and see, you know, it's not a British species anyway. So the county recorder is a really important person and is the key to basically the accuracy of the data, which is then put out to the various recording schemes. I'm going to mention this in a minute, but even the county recorder has to get help, and certain groups of moths which I'm not particularly au fait with, and I send my queries to a specialist referee. So there may be a referee who just looks at brambles, say, in the plant world, and he will then, or she will then say, oh yeah, it's okay, and send the record back to me, and then I add it to the database. So it's all a matter of how you actually make sure data is accurate. Where you send the stuff to is the problem that we've had recently, and there's a little app here called iRecord, which I'm going to come into later. But iRecord is basically a big sort of pit where you shove all your sightings. iRecord, the idea of iRecord is that you put your sightings of anything, whether it's a plant, an insect, a bird, into here, and then the various county recorders for the various recording schemes have all got access to iRecord. So every so often they will go into iRecord and get a download of anything which is pertinent to their group of insects or plants and to their particular county. The advantage of this is that you don't have to worry about who to send your data to. You just put it in iRecord. And up to now, there's been some reluctance on the part of some county recorders to use iRecord because getting the data out of iRecord in a form which your particular database will handle has not always been easy, but there's a lot of work going on in the background at the moment to make that slick. And there's one or two recording schemes which may have their own recording interface, but it's all based on iRecord. So the butterfly conservation, if you send any records of butterflies to butterfly conservation, they get dumped into iRecord. If you send in any records for dragonflies, they go into iRecord, but they have their own particular interface to it. But we'll come on to that a bit later. I just wanted to explain basically the principle of county recorder verification, why it's important and how it works. So how does it work? Let's say, for instance, Joe Bloggs is out walking around one night and he hears a bird singing after dark. It's got to be a nightingale because nightingales sing after dark. That's great. I'll write and tell the Telegraph I've heard a nightingale singing after dark. It was in Stone, where we live. Telegraph picks it up because they like stuff like that. All of a sudden, it's on the front page. Nightingale singing in Stone. The trouble is, it's not a nightingale. Obviously, it's a robin, and this is one of the problems of people sightings not going via someone else who knows what they're talking about. It's quite an easy mistake to make. People have heard of nightingales singing in Berkeley Square. They probably weren't nightingales at all. They're probably robins, but the data should have been checked before it was published. And okay, the guy who saw it's probably feeling a little bit sheepish. He got it wrong and the article was wrong. But he then goes out and sees a small bird in his garden, feeling a bit reluctant and a bit careful. He then describes it as a small bird, smaller than a willow warbler. It was hovering about in the bushes. It's got a lovely eye stripe, a white stripe and a yellow crown stripe, and it's got this lovely bit of buff colored here. And he looks it up and he thinks, "Ooh, I don't know, I think it's a firecrest." And reluctantly, he rings, he actually tells the county recorder he's seen a firecrest, and why he's seen it, because he's got this, this, and this. And of course, the county recorder says, "Yeah, that's fine. It's okay. It's a rare bird. You've described it. I'll accept it." And so that's the way it goes on. Unfortunately, things do get out into the public domain a bit, and it can cause problems like this. This is a butterfly called a silver-studded blue, and this particular nature reserve claimed to have 4 UK bat species of butterfly and a moth: dingy skipper, okay, small heath, silver-studded blue, and cinnabar moth. And this nature reserve's over here somewhere. Now, to claim they've got silver-studded blues is a major claim. It could involve that nature reserve in having to do management work, survey work. But what they should have done, and this was on the website, so it's there for everybody to see, what they should have done is have this checked. It turns out to be that the silver-studded blue was a common blue, not silver-studded at all. And so this is where, again, another instance of where verification is really important. So one of the ideas of Nicola's series of talks is to get people interested in recording wildlife in the Trent Valley. But obviously, with my mothing hat on, I'm interested in records from anywhere. How can you contribute? And we're going to look more in detail at these couple of apps, and I'll show you how they work after the talk. But there are 2 ways to submit records, or many ways to submit records. The 2 main sites, in my opinion, I have to stress this is my opinion, there are other websites for doing this. One is iRecord, which I've just mentioned, and BirdTrack. BirdTrack is the British Trust for Ornithology's app for recording bird sightings, and it's the one which most bird clubs now ask their members to use. And so this is a major recording site for bird records. So iRecord is great for everything else, but I think bird county recorders would prefer you use BirdTrack for bird data. So we'll go into those in a second. But what about social media? Well, social media is great, but if you put a picture up on social media on Facebook today, if the county recorder doesn't see it straight away, by tomorrow that sighting will be about, I don't know, 100 items down the list. So much stuff gets put on Facebook that it's very difficult to keep track of sightings. And one or two recording schemes do have some people who spend nothing, all their time doing nothing but monitoring Facebook or Twitter for records of, let's say, hoverflies. That's one of the groups which does this. But most county recorders, myself included, can't keep track of all the moth records, say, in my case, that get put up there. So what we say to people is that, yes, put your pictures up there, get them, you know, if you want them checked by somebody, but send the data to the county recorder and put it into iRecord. The fact that it's gone onto Facebook is not the same as saying you have submitted the data, because quite honestly, a lot of it will be missed. It's great for aiding identification. Many recording groups have got Facebook pages where there's a lot of help in identification, but your data still needs to be submitted to the county recorder or to iRecord or to whatever other method you do. Don't rely on social media. What do you need to record if you're out? These are the four main things you need to make a note of. What did you see? And how many of them were there? And if it's something unusual or something you don't know, take a photograph, because iRecord allows you to upload photographs, which is a real bonus. Particularly for insects. When I first started in insects, you kept a collection. There was no other way around it. There weren't any Facebook pages to get checked. There were very few field guides to things like beetles, not many great books on moths. So you kept a collection. And of course, a lot of people don't want to do that these days. It's not, it takes a lot of work to keep a collection in good condition anyway. And, you know, we shouldn't really be killing things unless there's a particular need to do it. So take a photograph. Modern cameras are fantastic for doing that. Make a note of where you saw it. Provide a grid reference or postcode if possible, and a recognizable site name, preferably taken from a map. And don't use things like my garden, which I get in iRecord. I get people putting it, when it's location, they put my garden. They give me a grid reference, but then I have to go and look up where that place is, because we need a name as well as a grid reference, ideally for sites. When did you see it? Most recording schemes prefer DDMMYYY format for the date, if possible. And then who saw it and who identified it if different from the person who found it. So you may have seen it, but you might have got it identified by somebody on the web. So we just need to know who the identifier was, if it wasn't you, say, or if it was you, but you had it confirmed by somebody else. That's also useful, especially if it's a rare species. So those are the four criteria when you're out recording. What do you need? Well, crikey. The minimum you need if you're a keen naturalist, I would say, is a hand lens and a notebook, and okay, a pair of bins if you're interested in birds, butterflies, dragonflies. Those three things. Mobile phone these days is useful because there are various recording schemes which have online apps, like this one for the grasshoppers and crickets, and it'll actually play the song or chirps of the particular species as well. So that's useful, but there's also, you can also get a sort of location app as well on your phone, so you can use that as a way of recording where you were. But there's a whole plethora of books, aren't there? I mean, sky's the limit. There's so many books you've got. But this particular series I find really good. It's the Wild Guide series here, and certainly for butterflies, birds, dragonflies, I think it's really a good series. And then the Collins one for plants is almost indispensable, really. But the Field Studies Council do a whole series of these pull-out sheets, which if you're with kids or somebody and you want to just look at butterflies, you just have this pull-out, fold-out sheet, and that's pretty good as well. But there's a whole lot of books out there, and if you are a general naturalist, it can become quite expensive buying books. Of course, you can do a lot on the web. You can search on the web, but you know, maybe I'm just too old. I prefer to see a book and flick through it than to actually scroll through pages and pages on the web. At least I know that the things are identified correctly in these books. So I'm not always quite so sure with some of the more obscure things on the web. Having got your data, I mentioned iRecord, and I'll do a demonstration of it, but this is what iRecord looks like when you log on. The first thing you need to do with iRecord is get yourself an account so that next time you go in there, it knows who you are and has got your email details, etc. That's fairly simple to do. And this is the sort of main screen in iRecord, and you can see you've got a date here. Again, it just brings up a calendar, first name, last name, email address. That will probably be filled in for you if you've logged in with an account. And then actually getting the species itself is quite simple. You just start typing in this box here, and it gives you options of what it could possibly be. So I've typed in common blue, and it's saying here, well, it's common blue butterfly, common blue sow thistle. Of course, I was looking at the blue butterfly. Just click that, go over to here, put how many I've seen. What stage? Is it an adult? Is it a larva? That's really important when it comes to plotting, doing phenology plots to see when something flies. It's important that we know whether it's an adult and not a larva. And then you can go to this screen where it asks you where you've seen it, and you can drill down on these maps till you get, you know, something like a 10-meter location if you want to. And you just click on where you saw it. It automatically puts a grid reference in here. And you can put a comment here about the habitat, what sort of habitat it was, and so on. So that is basically how it works. It is possible, if you've got your data on a spreadsheet, to upload a spreadsheet to iRecord. Bit tricky, but you can do that. And I know one or two of my moth recorders put their moth data in iRecord, and as it says here, add photo. So that's what makes iRecord really useful, is that you can put in a photograph, and you may not know what it is, or you might, it asks you how confident are you in the identification, and so the county recorder who looks at it will be able to look at that photograph, and then he will say, yes, it is. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. The other main app is Bird Track. And again, this is run by the British Trust for Ornithology. You create an account with them as usual and just log in here. And with Bird Track, you create sites. And that site might be an area like this, or it might be a single spot like this. You give it a name, and then you can recall that site in future entries. And this is the input screen. So here's my site, which I downloaded. There's the date. It then says, are you doing a complete list or are you doing casual observations? Well, what a complete list is, if I went down to, say, I don't know, Blithfield Reservoir, I made a note of every bird I saw and I counted every bird I saw during that walk around Blithfield Reservoir, that would be a complete list. But if I went to Blithfield Reservoir, just had 5 minutes to spare, I saw a few ducks and a cormorant and maybe something a little bit rarer, like a, I don't know, a shag or something like that, that would be a casual list. And the reason for doing complete lists is that you can then start to do stats on it. Well, by comparing it with lists from all over the country, the BTO can do stats on that, whereas on here it's a little bit more difficult. So they do make this distinction. On here, I've made effort to see everything, record everything I've seen. Here, I'm just making odd sightings. So this is the entry form for bird track. It's very, very simple. You start to type in the species name and it comes up with a list of what it thinks are the most likely species, and you click on it and it puts it in here. Rook 50 plus, there's at least 50, I don't know how many. Blue tit, black-headed gull. I can then go into here and I can click further information. So I can also say I've seen 200 black-headed gulls, but they were all flying west, as you can see here. And there's other things like breeding information. I could say I've seen a pair of red starts, they were feeding chicks. So all that information can go in into bird track. And once it's in there, the BTO use it, of course, and your county recorder can download all the sightings you've made of birds in the county. But you can do quite a lot of stuff with your own data. So on here, for instance, I went into this filter and I said, I want to look for Staffordshire, all my sightings of red start, where are they in Staffordshire? And it'll plot them on the map there. And I could just go into all UK and it would show me where I found red starts right the way across the United Kingdom. I can create lists of species, not just a map. I can create checklists of birds I've seen at certain sites and when I first saw them, when I last saw them. There's an awful lot you can do with the data, your own data in bird track, as well as the county recorders getting hold of it. So bird track's a really powerful tool, and I'd advise anybody who's interested in bird watching to do that. The BSBI were some of the first people to do county atlases, and they produced 2 atlases now, and they're now starting to think about doing another atlas. So they'll be getting people to go out and start to map again the county the flora across the whole of the UK. So sightings again can be entered by iRecord, or in this case it's probably a good idea if you're if you're interested in recording botany, to get in touch with your local county recorder to find out if you can be of any help in the next atlas and how he wants the data sending to him. There may be special recording forms, I'm not sure. I think when the last atlas was done, iRecord hadn't been invented and stuff was done on paper forms. That might be different for the next one. But, you know, do look out for that. It's something where we can be helpful in mapping the flora of our counties. The mapping the flora distribution maps, again, they were mainly done in the 10-kilometer basis, but I think the data they want to collect is much more refined this time, and there may be some aspect of counting quantities. I'm not sure. Mapping the flora of Staffordshire, that was done, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, the Staffordshire flora. That was done on a tetrad basis, and these maps again are all available online now, so you can download these maps yourself. But again, that's where we as local botanists were able to contribute to the mapping the flora of the county. So there's a lot you can do usefully. Birds, if you're interested in birds at all, then we've seen Bird Track. We can see what it's capable of producing, the maps it's capable of producing. So both the BTO and the county recorders can get hold of this data. So it's really useful tool to use. As well as Bird Track, the BTO run a series of recording schemes, special recording schemes, and I'm going to talk about this one here in a minute. Garden Bird Watch, the Breeding Bird Survey. This is where volunteers take on a site and they monitor the breeding birds in that site. They make 2 morning visits along, and you do need to be able to identify birds on site, song and call, but that's a specialist survey. The Wetland Bird Survey is where volunteers go out to a water across the country. They go out on the same Sunday each month to count waterfowl. So we've got an accurate idea of how many ducks and geese there are in the country at any particular time of the year. Again, there are certain waters which haven't got a designated recorder. That's something, if you're interested, you've got a particular pond or lake near you and you think, no, I don't mind doing that once a month, going out and counting everything on the lake. You could get in touch with the BTO and do that. And Waterways Breeding Survey, again, it's like a tetrad along the length of water where you can go and count the number of breeding birds. All part of the BTO's work, but somewhere where we can actually do something useful. Garden Bird Watch I want to mention because a lot of us bird watch from home, and we may have people who want to contribute to this scheme of Nicola's, but can't get out very much. And the Garden Birdwatch scheme run by the BTO is something which disabled people or people with limited mobility can actually do something really useful and really positive in recording birds. Basically, what you do is you record the maximum number of each species visiting your garden over the period of a week, the maximum number at any one time, that is. So if I went out this morning at 9 o'clock and saw 5 blue tits on my feeder, but I went out at midday and saw 12, then 12 would be the number of blue tits I'd record because they were all there at one time, visible at one time. You don't sort of accumulate the numbers during the day. Then at the end of the week, you send off to the BTO the maximum number of birds that you saw. So this is the recording form, and it's all online. So you just fill in the number of birds that you saw of each species, maximum number during the week. And you then also get the chance to say how many, put in the number of butterflies, dragonflies, mammals, or other things as well. If you're interested, you don't have to do that. You then are asked what sort of food you put out. So if, you know, peanuts, water, stuff like that. And then you submit your count. So that's it. It's really simple to do, but it's something you can do which is useful, incredibly useful these days. It's showing how bird numbers fluctuate quite nicely. I think there's about 16,000 people take part in Garden Birdwatch. And again, like the other bird track survey, you can actually output the data yourself. So you can see here for bullfinch, I can output all the records since 2003 to 2020 of bullfinches in my garden, and I can see how the numbers vary from year to year and from week to week. So there's quite a lot you can do with it. And you can also see the reporting rates. So 99% reporting rate of blackbirds. So obviously, as you would expect, I get blackbirds almost every week in the garden. I've been recording blackbirds for 1,077 weeks. Of course, that's a long time. But that's a really useful survey to take part in. You do pay to take part in this survey. I think it's about £15 a year, but you get quite a glossy quarterly magazine as well. And it also helps to fund the scientists who work on this particular survey as well. It helps to offset costs of people. As well as the BTO, the West Midland Bird Club is our leading bird club, which covers the counties you see here. And it's been producing, an annual report like this for over 80 years. So there's a heck of a lot of data available on birds in these 4 counties. And in 2018, when we did this report, we had over 900 contributors, who together submitted 300,000 bird records to the West Midland Bird Club. And most of those records came in using bird track. And all these county reports, going right the way back to 1952, are available as PDFs online. So a lot of this data is really accessible. When it comes to insects, we're in a totally different ballgame. We've just been talking about plants and birds mainly, but insects are such a big subject. People say, oh, how can I get into insects? I said, well, you don't get into insects, you have to specialize. And when you realize there are 27,000 species of insects in the British Isles, but only 600 species of birds, to 3,000 species of plants, insects far outweigh all the others. And of course, what you don't do is most people don't look at all insects. What they do is specialize. So if we look at insects here, we've got the primitive insects with no wings. So these are soil living insects, like springtails. So what you would probably do here is you'd specialize in springtails if you're interested in that particular group and ignore everything else. Or down here, you might say, okay, I'm interested in insects. I'll have a look at dragonflies. There's only 42 of those. And there's lots of books on dragonflies. Similarly, you've got grasshoppers and crickets. There's lots of books on those. There's only 30 species. There's tape recordings of them. There's quite an active recording scheme for grasshoppers and crickets. So people tend to, if they're interested in insects, tend to specialize in 1 or 2 groups. But even then, when you get down to here, there are 7,000 species of flies in the British Isles. So people tend to specialize even further than that, and they may just look at hoverflies, say, of which there's probably 250 species. There's some good field guides to hoverflies, and there's an active website and a Facebook page. But the problem with a lot of these things, like flies and beetles, I'm sure David Coles will agree with me here, you can't identify them all from photographs. a lot of flies are little black jobs. You have to count the bristles here and there and so on. And it's not something you can do on a insect flying around in a tube. And quite often you need to have specimens, which a lot of people don't have the space or time to do. But so you tend to specialize on those groups, which are fairly straightforward. You then might say, oh, I'm quite interested. I like hoverflies. I might go and look at ichneumons, or I might go and look at, I don't know, parasite flies, tachinid flies. And then there's a whole nother set of problems, but there's a whole nother set of literature. So whilst you might say, okay, there's one book on dragonflies or two, when you get into these groups down here, you've got a whole new library to acquire, and it becomes quite expensive. But there are these websites which are available to you if you want to go down that route. A lot of them have specialized recording schemes within them, like this one here. It's got recording schemes for gnats, crane flies, hoverflies. All these have their own particular web pages and maybe have downloads that will help you to identify. So the Diptera has got quite a lot of pages of help available to it. Bees, Wasps and Ants has got its own particular website, and again there's a lot of help available to you there, lots of images and so on. UK Beetle Recording Scheme, again, beetles are quite a big group, and some people tend to specialize in, say, the ground beetles or the longhorn beetles, because they're quite obvious and not too difficult to identify from photographs. When you get down to some of these other things, they're so small you can hardly see them anyway. They become a little bit more complicated. I mentioned at the start local record centres, and the Staffordshire Ecological Record or Environmental Record Centre is our main source of data on Staffordshire wildlife. And they are almost unique, I think, in providing distribution atlases for most of our insects in Staffordshire. Certainly, I don't know of anywhere else you can go and find distribution maps for all these groups of insects on a county basis. And one of the ways in which you identify something is to, first of all, go and look to see if that species occurs in your area for a start. If it doesn't, then you might want to think twice as to whether you've identified it correctly or not. But Staffordshire Wildlife Trust Ecological Records are our main place, and they have access to iRecord. So you can either send data straight to them, or you can put your data into iRecord, and SER will be able to download it from there. So there's a lot you can do. There's a lots of outlets for your data. There's a lot you can get looking at, and maybe after the tea break we can have a look at, or you maybe want to ask a few questions about how you get started with this, or what. What I thought I'd do now is, if I can just kill that, oops, is to show you one or two of the recording schemes.
Sorry, Dave, I'm just conscious of the time.
Okay.
We're 8:10 now.
Okay,
so
fine.
If it's all right, if we maybe have the break now and then come back
then I'll go on to that. Yeah.
For questions in that afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just conscious that I did promise everybody a chance to stretch legs. So if we take 5 minutes now, and then we'll come back and finish off with questions and that at the end.
Yep. Okay.
Right. See everybody in a few minutes. All right, if we're all back, we can get started again now. Did anybody have any questions for Dave about what he's spoken about? There's so much information in there, an enormous amount to take in, but it's really interesting to hear all the processes and hear how important it is for us to be contributing to these schemes. So did anyone want to come in with any questions? You can unmute yourself, or you can use the raise hand function and I'll come to you. Or any comments or your own experiences of data recording.
Nicola.
Oh, yeah, I can see you want to speak, Linda, but you've got quite an echo.
I know. I don't quite know how to deal with that.
It's all right, give it a go.
I'll tell you what. I'll have to go on my husband's machine.
So like getting feedback from the loudspeaker into the microphone.
Well, we've had one in the chat, Linda, just while you're sorting out your speakers maybe. One from Richard Salmon. Is there a list of county recorder contacts? Which is a really good question.
I don't, the easy answer is that for butterflies and moths, yes, there is. You just go to Butterfly Conservation's website, or you go into Google and say county moth recorders list, and it'll come up with a link. I'm not sure about the other groups. You'd have to go into each recording scheme and find out the county recorders, say for beetles or whatever. So there's no list which has county recorders for everything. They're all specialized lists for each particular group of flora and fauna.
Would that be the kind of thing that someone like Staffordshire Ecological Records has a list of? So if you wanted to know that, then you could contact Staff's Ecological Records and they can let you know who it is. That's right. SER would know all the county recorders for all the groups. So that's your best bet. But, you know, I was just sort of thinking, if you were going on holiday somewhere, then obviously using an iRecord, you wouldn't need to know who the county recorder is. But for Staffordshire, you may want to contact the county recorder to see if there are any areas they particularly want data from, which you might be able to help fill in. They'd love to hear from you. Yeah. Linda, did you want to try your question again?
Yep, I'm being Peter now.
That's it. Yeah, we can hear you better there.
Yeah, that was a feedback problem because we've got two computers in the room. Okay, the question was about common species, because obviously Bird Track kind of caters for that a bit with the whole list or just casual. But if you're using iRecord, I can see the problem that recorders would get loads and loads of, say, blackbird records. But on the other hand, if you don't put them in, you're skewing the data, aren't you? So what happens about that?
I'll just tell you an interesting aside to do with that. I used to be a bird ringer, and when I first started ringing birds in the 70s and 80s, we were penalized if we ringed house sparrows. So everybody thought house sparrows were so common, they didn't do anything. We could ring hundreds and hundreds and use hundreds and hundreds of rings and time and effort in logging them all. And so we were prevented from doing so. And now look where we are. House sparrows numbers are falling, but a lot of the data we could have got by recording them, no matter how common they were at the time, we've not been able to sort of monitor that drop as effectively as if we'd ringed them all along. So it is really important, no matter what you record, if it's common or not, to put the data in there. Data storage is nothing. It's not a problem these days. Not like when I first started, when floppy disks were 8 inches across. You couldn't store hardly anything on them. And nowadays, it's nothing just to store all the common data, because you're not just recording it for this year. You might be recording it next year and the year after, and you're able to monitor changes in numbers. So if our common species are disappearing, it's just as important as if our rare ones are disappearing. And it perhaps it's even more important if our common species are disappearing, because there's something really wrong then. Whereas a lot of our rare stuff is quite often it's only on the borderline of being here or not, and it's not quite so drastic as say like that moth I showed you, the large yellow underwing, our commonest species of moth, numbers have declined dramatically in moths, common species. So there's something going wrong somewhere, but we still need to record everything, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That I was hoping you'd say that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Linda, for the question. So a couple more questions in the chat now. So from Bethany, what would be your best advice for a beginner that would like to get better with species identification?
My main point would be to specialize. Get to know your common species first. There's so much information on the web and help out there, but do be aware that you still need to buy, I would still buy a book. So if you're interested in birds, there's lots of books on birds, but the British Trust for Ornithology does lots of videos on bird identification. There's so much stuff out there for people which just wasn't available 30, 40 years ago. People just spoiled for choice. But if you want to get into things like beetles and stuff, life's going to be a bit harder for you because there's so many of them, and the literature available for them is not as great as say birds or flowers. But you know, I would, if it's insects you're looking to look at, then certainly look at things like hoverflies, where there's a book on them. They're quite colourful. Dragonflies is another group, grasshoppers and crickets. Not many species, but lots of information on them. And join some of the online Facebook groups. They've got lots of help. You can upload a picture and somebody will tell you what it is. Yeah, there's so much help out there.
Yeah, Richard made that point in the chat as well, joining groups and then able to learn from each other as well. And
absolutely.
And as your skills grow, I suppose you can support other people on their journey starting out. Yeah. And then another question from Mary in the chat: how valuable are contributions from amateur citizens interested in the wildlife in their local areas?
We're all amateurs. We're amateurs in the sense we don't get paid, not amateur in the sense that we do a half-hearted job. I think we ought to distinguish that. And we are valuable people. Even just an ordinary sort of member of the public recording butterflies in their gardens, it's really valuable. I've recorded in our garden. I added a new species of moth yesterday to the county just because I saw it on the windowsill, took a photograph of it. I knew it was something I didn't know, sent it to another expert, and there I got a new county record. So just recording things you see in your garden is just as important. Gardens are one of our biggest nature reserves. And yeah, we can all do something useful by just sending in records of what we see, no matter what it is. Somebody will be able to make use of it.
Yeah, I suppose I like to think of it as kind of that Tesco slogan of every little helps. I mean, there's
absolutely
21 people signed in on this call, possibly a few more if there's more than one person watching on a screen. If we all started to send in records, then that's a lot more people suddenly starting to contribute as well. I mean, I know that I don't add records nearly as much as I should in my role, but it's something that I'm going to have to start practicing and just doing a little bit at a time and getting used to getting into the habit of doing it, I suppose.
Well, I just had 30,000 records of moths for 2020. So that's a lot of data, and it's all done by people either recording moths in their garden. Some people go out in the field with moth traps, perhaps not as much as I'd like them to, but it's difficult these days to do that. People don't feel secure going out at night as much. perhaps they used to in the old days, but just recording a moth trap in your garden can add an awful lot of data.
So put that into,
same with the birds. We had, as I said, we had over 900 people send in records for the 2018 birds of Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Worcestershire and the West Midlands. That's a lot of data.
That's really interesting. So for context, one of the targets that the Transforming the Trent Valley project is trying to do is to make a list of 10,000 records for the Transforming the Trent Valley scheme area over the 5 years of the scheme. So hearing that Dave, you've just had 30,000 moth records just in 2020 alone, I think we'll probably reach that target, and hopefully if anyone wants to get involved in that, then you'd be very, very welcome to get in touch with me and find out how you can get involved.
Well, just in our own garden, we've had nearly 500 species of moths recorded in our garden, and I think most people's garden would have 300 species of moths over a period of time, not all in 1 year. But I just thought people just don't, well, perhaps they do now since COVID-19, realize how rich their gardens are in terms of wildlife. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh yeah, so one
somebody
from
there has just written about going out with an experienced person. I mean, that's not, when I first started natural history interest, we had a number of field clubs and natural history societies. Sadly, they've all gone. People didn't want to turn out at night. There's so much on the telly, didn't want to come to talks. And so it's difficult these days to find somebody to go out with who's knowledgeable. I think it's one area where perhaps Staffordshire Wildlife Trust could actually do more in taking over the role of what used to be the Natural History Society, and taking people out botanizing and on organized trips and looking at butterflies. I mean, going out with a moth trap with an organized group is not easy these days because of health and safety, and you have to have insurance and all this sort of stuff. But going out, taking people out, perhaps to look for flowers or something like that, is something which would be really useful, I think. And it's something which it doesn't exist at the moment. I think the Wildlife Trust could actually start looking at doing something like that.
Yeah, from the conversations I've had with them, I think they would like to look at something like that. So I don't want to use these talks too much as a plug for the work that Transforming the Trent Valley does, but actually I think it's one of the things we're doing can kind of answer this question and help. So within the Trent Valley area, that scheme area that I showed you earlier, we will be doing certain training and certain surveys to be going out and looking for different species. So that's part of my role, is to be putting on training for residents or for people who would like to learn a little bit more about identification and how to do surveys, with an aim to then be going and starting to collect those records and monitor those records and add them to record schemes as well. So tomorrow I'll be sending out a quick email to everybody just with a very brief feedback form, but I can also put this information in that email as well, so that if you are interested in getting involved in that aspect for the Transforming the Trent Valley, then you can know how to get in touch with me and get involved in that side of things as well.
What I thought I'd do is just show you how iRecord works as the main recording scheme, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, it's 8:30, so I'm happy to
running
keep
out
it.
Time.
No, well, I'm happy to keep the call open, and anybody who does want to stay, if Dave, if you're happy to go through it, then that's absolutely fine. But
only 5 minutes.
Yeah. But if you do have to shoot off, then that's also fine as well. So I'll leave it up to people to choose themselves if they want to stay and watch it's a demonstration, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just showing how it works, and how it works from the county recorder's side as well. So when you send your data in, so I'll just, if I can find the right slide.
Bring it on from us, John.
Is that okay? Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah.
So when you go into iRecord, this is screen you get. I'll go into the home page, something like that. You've got an option here to enter a casual record or a list of records from one particular site, or list of records from several sites, or there are some species group forms, which I mentioned before, that some recording schemes have their own particular form to use, but they're all putting their data into iRecord. So you can see here, you've got forms for ladybirds, moths, and so on. But if you're just doing a casual record, you click on this link here, ask you for a date, name, species. So I could put in common, then I haven't quite typed enough, BL, blue, not enough yet. Eventually it'll come to the species you want, and you just click on common blue. How certain am I it is a common blue? Well, I've got options here. I can say likely or uncertain. Sex, is it male or female, or just leave it as not recorded? How many did I see? And what stage was it? Adult, pre-adult, or other? So it could be a larva or an adult. I can add a photograph or several photographs. If it's a real rarity, you might want to say it's sensitive. I don't want anybody to know exactly where it is, but the county recorder needs to know, and he can contact you later with asking for more details. And then location, again, that's done from a map here. So I know it's somewhere on Cannock Chase, so I can just zoom in on that, like you've probably seen on other schemes. Okay, it's there. And it puts in the grid reference, and it puts in a map, so you can actually see the satellite picture where it is. And you can then put in a habitat. What sort of habitat is it? Any comments, and then you submit the record, and that's all there is to it. It's quite easy. And this is the most valuable thing for a county recorder, is knowing that you've done the grid reference correctly. So a number of times we get grid references for moths which are somewhere in the North Sea. It is quite a lot. So that's you from the user's point of view. But if I'm a county recorder, I can then go in to verify the data which you've actually put in there. So if I click on verify, I want to leave that page. It's going to go find all the moths which are waiting for me to verify the records of. And you can see there's 63 moths at the moment in there waiting verification. And if it's somebody I'm quite happy with, knowing that they know what they're talking about, I can verify all their records in one go. Otherwise, I can go through one at a time. And these people have put in, well, the first thing which happens is iRecord does a quick filter through the records, and it throws up a query like this one here. The following rules were triggered by this record. And it's saying here, species where care is needed in identification. So extra evidence may be required. In fact, it's not. It's a winter moth. That's quite all right. These have passed the verification test. This is another one where tawny speckled pug, there's species where care is needed. iRecord does this. It's not always successful, but it gives a flag here for me to look at. But I can then go into one of these records and say, okay, she's recorded a sallow kitten here. I can click on it. There's a picture. Yep, that's a sallow kitten, all right. Click on there, and then I can go over here and say accept. So I verified that record. Then she'll get a comment back saying record verified or something on those lines, and that will then go into the database And at the end of the year, what I do is I go through the database and download from it all the records that have been verified of moths in Staffordshire. But I do have to go through and check them all to make sure they're okay, which I can do either one at a time like this, or I can go into here and go click, 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 and accept them all in one go. But that's from my side of what happens when you send in a record to iRecord. I can go in and find out any comments and where you've seen it, when it was submitted, all this other information about that particular record, etc., etc. And if you've got it wrong, I can correct the identification and send you an email to say it was wrong and this is what it really is. So that's how the verification of the records go on. And basically, nobody else can see this data, only me as County Moth Recorder for Staffordshire and you as the people who put the records in. It's basically a place there for you to store your records for your own use and for me to actually get them out and use them. It's not, this iRecord is not used directly to map anything. I have to take the data out, put it into my database, and then I can do my mapping or whatever. And Butterfly Conservation get a copy of all the Staffordshire moth records every year, and they're just working on a new, we're just working on a new atlas of moths for Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Staffordshire, Worcestershire, West Midlands, and Shropshire, and that will be available fairly soon, and it looks something like this. So all this data that you're collecting now, if I go to angle shades, that's the sort of map which you'll get in a few months' time. Staffordshire's up here, Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Shropshire. So that's what's happening. And all this data on here is reliable because the 4 county recorders have accepted the records. So that's it. Okay, we can unshare that now. I don't know how you do that. Stop sharing, right.
You did, there we go. That was really interesting. That's, yeah, just following on from what you were saying about how the verification process works, actually seeing that was really interesting to see that extra process from your point of view as well. I just had a whole load of questions pop into my head, but we have run over time now. So okay. If anyone does have any more questions that you think of later, then do pop them over to myself and I can forward them on to Dave to answer, if Dave's all right with that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep. Yep, so I'll send out the feedback email tomorrow with all the information that I've promised, with different links and information there. It would be really helpful if you do have anything specific to feedback, or just if you've enjoyed the evening. It's really lovely to hear that so that we can improve these talks in future. Hope to see you again at another talk. Thank you so much to Dave for such an interesting and detailed talk about that process of wildlife recording and biological recording there as well. And massive thanks to everyone for coming.
Okay.
Right, thank you everyone and have a lovely evening.
Bye everybody.